Yeah, by way of background, I'm at the med school in Duluth. I've been there for 8 years and got my second master's degree. I'm done. I think I'm done with formal education, but in bioethics. And I came to it by research ethics. So I chaired, I was in Australia for 8 years, did some research integrity there, causes of vision impairment research in Australia, India, and Hong Kong. And got involved in research ethics there. When I came back to the US, I was the head of a large biobank, so 20,000 people enrolled, DNA, plasma, and serum samples linked to their electronic health records, all sorts of discovery research that you could do with 20,000, which sounds large, but when you're looking at rare diseases, actually wasn't very large. We would have to be combining data across large data sets and thinking about the ethics of that. When I moved back to Duluth, sort of did Circle of Life thing, 11 years ago to return to Duluth where I grew up to take care of aging parents. And one of the cases, ethics is so much about narrative, is my father. When I was chairing the IRB, or Institutional Review Board at Essentia Health, I still do clinical ethics there. They like to have a link between their research and their clinical ethics. Deer in headlight. Despite having a PhD, I'd never had even a single class in philosophy, much less ethics. So I thought, oh, I'll just take a class or two online. That turned into a master's degree in clinical ethics. So the HECC abbreviation is Certified Healthcare Ethicist, which is relatively new that we have certification in the US. And I think I was the second cohort doing that. And I've been that for 5 years, I guess, because I've been recertified as well. So I take call as an ethicist at Essentia Health at the hospital and clinics there. I'm on call 24/7, like one week or 2 weeks a quarter. If we have time, happy to answer questions about that too. All right, why am I not going forward now? That's odd. I'm gonna escape and go back in. Well, I can't even get out. How weird. And so weird. All right. All right, so we'll go through just basic ethics principles. How many of you have had a class in ethics? Yeah, I had not had one. It's unfortunate. I would really love, especially in the sciences where all you're doing just these amazing new technologies and discoveries, that everyone be required to take an ethics class and to be thinking about ethical implications of, of what we're doing. That age-old question of just because we can, should we really, classic ethics question. So we're just going to review some basic ethics principles and then consider how in robotics, and very specific robotics, because of course that covers a just vast area, and then consider how women, I know I'm getting an echo, are more likely to be impacted by robotics in healthcare, and that's specifically because of demographics. All right, my next two slides are land acknowledgements, very important. We're in Native American History Month. And so we're recalling that we are on native land. It was ceded through, in Duluth, this is my Duluth one, by the Ojibwe in a treaty, and every treaty has not been followed through by our US government, unfortunately. University of Minnesota Duluth developed this land acknowledgement in 2019, which I love. And this, there's a Tweed art gallery on the Duluth campus. One of the native artists created this piece. And this is the land acknowledgement, important not just to acknowledge, but to be inclusive of our native communities. All right, so recent bioethics history. You all have heard of the Hippocratic Oath. Hippocrates, very long time ago. med students, a lot of med schools still include that. More often now, and here at the University of Minnesota, our students create their own oath. They'll still, familiar with the Hippocratic Oath, but they'll create their own. It will still have some aspects of the Hippocratic Oath. Taking care of others. Privacy is almost always in there, and we'll talk about some of these issues. Been a lot more focus on bioethics really since World War II and the atrocities during the Holocaust. That led to the Nuremberg Code. Not going to talk about that sort of history, but there's a lot on the research ethics side of things. On the clinical ethics, really started in not honestly recently, 1962. So we had dialysis developed. We didn't have enough dialysis machines for everybody. So how did they go about deciding who was going to get dialysis? And if you didn't get dialysis, this is the case today too, people died. So it started in Seattle. Seattle Artificial Kidney Center was charged to develop an allocation system for dialysis. The committee agreed that social worth. Unbelievable. I mean, it just seems atrocious to us now that they would judge people by their social value. And you guess who wasn't judged worthwhile to get a dialysis? Yeah. Yep. Horrible. Absolutely horrendous. This really was the birth of our modern bioethics, formalizing bioethics consulting. So what I do when I'm on call, there'll be two of us on call at a time. There's an ethical dilemma or disagreement on care, a lot of times end of life care, and whether or not somebody's ventilated and continue to be, as I had lots of examples, of course. We don't ever use social worth. And I'll talk about some of the decision making that we do. And this is at the time we're in a clinic and we've already got these technologies. What's really nice, and again, thanks for the invitation, is to be talking to students, to be thinking about when we're developing the technologies and who it's impacting. So the term bioethics as a term has only been around since 1970. It's really new. American Society of Bioethics and Humanities, if this is a topic that you become interested in, sort of the professional organization for applied clinical ethics. And it's only been formed since 1998. And as I said, they have the certification for healthcare ethics consultants. All right, we're going to do now a quick review of secular bioethics principles, so non-religious. So my guess is you've heard about them, but we'll just go through them anyway. Very commonly, 4 secular ethics principles that people go to. In ethics consulting, our form at the hospital used to say, oh, which of these ethics principles are we considering? We don't do that anymore now. Tell you a little bit by a different framework that we use, but we'll go through each one in turn. So autonomy is the right of adult patients with capacity to make decisions about their care free from interference. Not very many words, there's a lot here. There's a lot here to this. Let's start with the free from interference. How do you think that interference comes in when people want to make decisions for themselves?
The doctor who says this is what I think should be done here. Maybe be biased.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have that on a further slide. We call that paternalism. And sometimes paternalism can be okay if used judiciously. It's not always painted as a horrible thing, paternalism. It's not always bad. It's a very gendered name, paternalism. But yeah, so free from interference. Interference in the research setting can be, any idea why there might be interference for someone to freely be making a decision about being involved in a trial to try a new device, for instance?
Sponsors and research on.
Yep, and it can be money. So when I was chairing the IRB, We actually shut the study down because it was an injectable for a medication to lower blood cholesterol. And so risky to begin with, someone's giving themselves a shot every day. And the payment was $200 a visit. It was a large amount of money that we thought was what we call not coercive, but undue influence to participate. And sometimes this case was another one interesting as well, because the PI was going through the consent process with participants, and actually an owner or angel investor in the startup company developing the medication. For so many things going wrong, so the potential for, in fact, potentially coercion. So the difference between undue influence and coercion is where there's a power play. And a physician over a patient definitely has that power differential. Then the other part of this is capacity to make decisions. And I've got a slide to talk about that. Capacity versus competence. And they're used interchangeably a lot. So after this, go out and listen to see where you hear about capacity versus competence. They're not the same thing. So capacity, physicians, and when I'm working with med students, I say you in the future will be asked to determine if somebody has the capacity to make a decision for themselves. They may still be ruled legally competent because that's a legal definition, but capacity is situational. And where it's really situational is if somebody has dementia. And we're going to be talking about, dementia and long-term care and robots, that focus of today. Folks with dementia may have the capacity to make decisions for themselves on what they eat, what they're going to wear, whether or not they want to attend activity, but probably don't have the capacity to understand the implications of being involved in a trial, surgery for a new device, any of that. So they'll need to have somebody to help them with that decision. It also can fluctuate. So there's something called, which you may or may not have heard of, called sundowning. Okay, so sundowning occurs a lot in older people. Usually in a hospital, there can be a time of the day where they're just not as sharp. So if you're wanting to work with somebody to ask them about a decision, that's not the time to ask them. They might be able to be clear as a bell and be able to interact and make decisions in the morning, but not during that sundowning period. And that there can be physiologic reasons for that. Could be the meds they're on as well. Different reasons for that sundowning occur. The capacity is the patient's ability to consent or refuse care. It requires ability to understand. So they have to understand the information. Sometimes that's an informed consent document, either for a surgical procedure or for being involved in research, that they can appreciate that medical situation and the consequences of engaging in whatever they're being asked to do or not, that they can clearly communicate a choice. They don't have to do this verbally. It can be writing. It can be, if somebody's intubated, it can be that they're blinking. They can communicate in some way. And that they can engage in rational deliberation about their values in relation to that decision. So 4 points to that. Competence is illegal. So go to a court, and it's a county court would decide if somebody no longer possesses the level of capacity, and so we're legally going to take that away, that somebody else makes all of their decisions, not just healthcare, financial, but makes their decisions for them. That's a really high bar, as it should be. So we see a lot of people that have dementia. We know they have dementia. They still have legal competence because no one's gone through the process of going to a court to have that removed and a permanent decision maker named for them. We will sometimes, as an ethics committee or being on call, ask the hospital to go to the county because there's not a decision maker, and clearly the person can't make one for themselves and won't ever be able to. So it might be a temporary thing, but we're wanting somebody named permanently. Counties are reticent to do that because they have to pay somebody to be the decision maker. So that's what happens. If there's not a family member, somebody's paid through the county to make decisions. And again, high bar as it should be to strip somebody of their ability to legally make decisions for themselves. So anyway, that's the difference between capacity and competence. In autonomy, you necessarily have to have the competence, but have to have the capacity to make a decision for yourself. Beneficence is you're preventing evil or harm, or you're removing evil or harm, or you're doing or promoting good. So really it's that doing good. So Hippocratic Oath, I think that might be the first thing in there, that you're doing good. The physicians are doing good. Seems obvious, right? And then the flip side of that is non-maleficence, or not inflicting evil or harm. These two come at odds sometimes, even in healthcare. And a classic example of this would be chemotherapy. In the short term, it's doing a lot of harm, right? These targeted chemotherapies don't just target the tumor cells. They're hitting other cells and doing a lot of harm to the body at the time. But in the long run, that balances. We're hoping we're doing a lot more good. So yeah, this is where we can sometimes see some of these ethics principles conflict. Justice, oh, so important when we come to robotics. So there are a couple of different ways of looking at justice. The first is equals must be treated equally. Seems so simple, right? Of course, it's not the case. You can look at really almost anything in healthcare, and we know that people aren't treated equally. For the longest time, women weren't included in any clinical trials, and for a really long time. Now, for quite some time, an NIH proposal has to list what's your race, ethnicity, gender breakdown expected to be. And if you're not getting some good balance, why not? If you're not including women, if you're not including children, you have a good scientific rationale for that, which is all part of this justice question. And then distributive justice is interesting. So fair, equitable, and appropriate distribution of benefits and burdens determined by norms that structure the terms of social justice. Blah, a lot of words. On the Duluth campus, we've been there 53 years, our med school, and we've always been around wanting to train students who eventually want to practice rurally. Justice is huge because there's not justice across even the basics of geographic areas where you've got different access to healthcare, to technologies. This is my slides will be available. Yeah. So there's a hot link here to it's a great talk on global justice. So global justice really important when the other part of this justice is equals must be treated equally in a research setting. That if people are being asked to take any risk to be involved in research, even if it's minor, that they ultimately have the possibility of benefiting from that research. And researchers have done horribly by this for many years. Well, they go into developing countries where it might be less expensive to conduct their research, when the people who are participating ultimately, once the research is completed, aren't likely to benefit from it. So the issues around justice. So those are the four. All right. Part of this is consent, really important. So informed consent. And what does truly informed consent mean? Right? There are, if you've ever gone through an IRB, Institutional Review Board, we have one here just there, I say here, housed here at the Twin Cities. We don't have separate ones for each of the campuses. And I'll go through here the Twin Cities, but to give informed consent, again, people have to have the capacity to do that. So we talked about that. They have to understand the risks and benefits of the research. What happens if they don't participate? Then there's consent or assent for minors. This varies by state. So depending on where you end up living and doing your research, or if you ever get on the clinical side, there's a legal definition by state as to who can make decisions when they can make decisions. So some states, we've got some states that are 16, which have one that's 15 even. And then paternalism, we talked about a little bit. So paternalism can be okay. especially if you're not necessarily forcing your own opinion. So when I'm on ethics call, I have to think really hard, step back and think about what are my own internal biases that I'm not, trying to force them on somebody else. We talk about a lot in ethics consulting that we get called in when the patient or decision maker for the patient disagrees. We never ask, we never question somebody's capacity if they do agree. Which is interesting. All right, so decision making. We talked a little bit about the necessity for capacity to make decisions. So if somebody doesn't have capacity and they've named a healthcare agent, I'm guessing you folks are all young, have not named a healthcare agent for yourself. Because why would you? You just don't think anything's going to happen. And we hope nothing does. You might want to think about it. Two different ways to make decisions for people. Best interest, and we just talked about that, right? What's in somebody's best interest? So that's the beneficence side of things. If somebody has never had the capacity to make a decision for themselves, and that's a child, so never developed enough to do that. Get this up my way. Or they've lost capacity, and that happens with people developing dementia. So they had capacity at some stage and lose capacity to make decisions. We do something called best interest or substituted judgment, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference. So substituted judgment is if somebody had capacity, so they were an adult, had capacity, we knew what decisions they would make for themselves, they lose capacity, then their decision makers should use substituted judgment. So they shouldn't be saying, "Oh, this is what I think. This is what I think this person would want." And that's what that is. This varies by state, interestingly. Most states in the US, not Minnesota, not Wisconsin, have state statutes to say if you haven't named a healthcare decision maker for yourself, then your spouse would be the first one, regardless of whether or not you're estranged. It would be your spouse. This is why our state doesn't do this, because they're concerned about this sort of thing. If there's not a spouse, then it's usually an adult parent, then adult children, and then siblings. And so mandated by state. Most states have this. We do not. And so the healthcare team is looking to see who can best speak for the patient. And sometimes in the case of somebody experiencing homelessness, it could be somebody else in the shelter who knows them best to speak for them. All right, the Belmont report, I don't know if you've heard of, really, really important. So this is a result of something called the Tuskegee experiments. So that's good. You have heard about them. Horrible, atrocious, went on for many, many years, studying syphilis in Black men. And it started before antibiotics. Once antibiotics were available, they were not offered antibiotics. Yeah, just egregious. And this is long after World War II and the atrocities where we'd already, set up ethical principles. So similar, those three ethical principles are the respect for persons, the beneficence and justice. Applications are informed consent for research. Again, you have to provide enough information, and that's really crucial. So paternalism can come in if you don't provide enough information, people can't make an informed decision, right? That they have to comprehend what's in there. So a typical informed consent document, say for a clinical trial, testing new chemotherapy, it'll be 20 pages long. 20 pages long at the 14th grade level. Oh, we need to do so much better. You can tell I feel pretty strongly about these issues. Assessment of risks and benefits. And then equal selection of subjects again, so people equally have the opportunity to be involved and to gain from the research. Some other ethical frameworks, and I could spend an hour talking about each one, but just so that you're aware of them. Narrative ethics is actually really what I use. I think about the ethical principles, but I'm just hearing someone's narrative, right? I want to hear from them. I want to hear from their friends and loved ones who are impacted about decisions. There's something called Catholic ethical and religious directives. So if you were to receive your care at a Catholic affiliated facility, or want to be involved in research, test a new device at a Catholic facility, the Catholic facility, and therefore everybody in it, must follow these Catholic ethical and religious directives. Have a lot to do with beginning and end of life, not so much in between, easily available online. Jewish ethics, Islamic ethics. We're doing some research, pilot study in Duluth now, looking at Native American, trying to get some more indigenous. We don't have anything really in writing. Something called feminist ethics, another feminist philosophy of technology, a little longer YouTube video, but again, you could watch that at a future time. So use of robots. What about in the home? I even fill this in, you could go in.
Robotic vacuum.
Yep.
Robotic medical dispensers, or some other technology which is coming up, like healthcare robots, like humanoids, just to take care of someone with dementia, or like robotic wheelchairs for people to go out.
Yep. Anything else in the home? Robots or AI, how else is it used in the home?
Dishwashers and all the washing machines are types of robots. So
It's everywhere. It's really everywhere.
they don't think under them. It's just a machine. Machine robots, programmable. Nah.
In healthcare, again, so many different areas. Surgical robots have been used for quite some time. Service robots. When I was at Marshfield Clinic, we had a new research building, and there was a robot that was in the research building and had the clinical labs as well as the research labs. And there was a little track on the floor, and the robot, we were told, get out of the way of the robot that moves samples around. They've been great. We with the robotics in a clinical lab, there are zero sample mix-ups. It's just been phenomenal. And that happened before. I mean, we humans make mistakes, right? The robots don't make mistakes with those samples. And in a lab setting, if you make a mistake on a lab that influences care that someone's going to get, it's a big deal. Nurse and patient support robots, used to rehab a lot. Lab robots I mentioned. For dementia care, there's been the pets and humanoid robots. We'll talk a little bit about that and think about the ethics. I should have flipped this the other way around. So interesting, right? So I just did this quick last night. I love this with Google Slides. I can update them whenever I want to. But as of about 8 o'clock last night, since PubMed was started in 1968, there are 7,600 results just doing robotics in healthcare. And what an increase. And just continuing to do so, right? Just absolutely proliferating. And AI, you get even just amazing. This is from the Life Architect AI and looking at the different types of humanoid robots. This is from a year ago. And then good colleague, friend and colleague of ours on the Duluth campus, Arshia Khan. So she's been doing research on robotics and healthcare for a number of years now. She works with these gorgeous little robots called Pepper, yep, in nursing home
and assisted living facilities and been doing a lot with music therapy. So music is amazing. Music is amazing for somebody with dementia, really for anybody. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, when somebody's listening to music, lights up a different part of your brain. It's amazing. And so she's been doing some really cool stuff with music therapy in dementia, other things as well. So the potential for robotics in healthcare is huge. Boy, there was just last week, an article about the population in Finland, I think it was, where the birth rate has just declined so much, and the concern about caring for elderly, right? There aren't going to be enough people. So what can robots do to help fill in medication dispensary? Again, not going to make mistakes there. And we know people are going to take their medications because the robot's giving them to them. So the response, this would be in a whole other area of research. If you wanted to, and some people are doing this, this would be fun, easy to do. Actually, don't even have to go to an IRB for it. Social media, what's the response of people to robots? Again, huge. It's in the media all the time. It's in our peer-reviewed literature, just increasing all the time. So Fox 9 here locally in the Twin Cities did a story in 2022 with Professor Khan about her use of robots in nursing homes for dementia care. She had an article in New York Times, I think was right around that same time. So I was pulling up some of things again as I was preparing this lecture, and really interesting. Biased, of course, because it's who responds, but this would be an interesting thing to look at over time to see people's change, the community generally's change in response to robots in healthcare. One thing I didn't say in my first slide is ethics reflects time and place. So to talk about this issue 20 years ago or 20 years in the future, it'll be completely different what we're talking about. To have the same talk now versus in India, where we've done a lot of research, or in Europe, it'll look different today because ethics reflects our values at a time and place. So in 2022, it was nice coverage on Fox 9 of what she was doing. 13 comments. So 13 people took the time to comment on this YouTube posting. 11 of them were negative. 11 of the 13. Really interesting. Just 3 years ago. This is creepy. There were a couple of creepy comments. And then there was literally only one positive comment, which I thought was interesting. It's better than nothing. The staff's so busy in my brother's nursing home, they didn't catch a UTI. He had bleeding and all for 2 to 3 weeks. And maybe alleviate some of the, didn't get that, but some of the more tedium work. All right, special concerns for robotics and women in healthcare. And again, I'm thinking specifically use of robotics in nursing home, facilitated care, assisted living facilities. Bias training data. We talk about this. I teach a 2-credit course in research methods to graduate students in the spring, and we have a couple of sessions on AI and bias and detecting bias, right? AI can only use what's out there. And again, remember, for many years, until not that long ago, women were not included in any clinical trials. Any clinical trials. So women are going to be biased if we're using just that historic data that's out there. Women are not represented in much of research. So we've got bias training data. Job displacement, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. And you may have heard this already, given the field that you're already in. We reinforce some stereotype social roles that some of these robots are taking over. And then the longevity of women. And I'll show you that in a sec. But automation is estimated to influence twice as many women as men. So positions with more than a 90% chance of becoming automated through robotics are administrative assistant, office clerk, bookkeeper, cashier, all fields that are dominated by women. For every 7 men in occupations with a 90% of likelihood of automation, there are 10 women. So definitely going to affect women. And if we think about robotics, again, in potentially assisted living or nursing homes, I don't know how recently you've been in either an assisted living or a nursing home. Gender balance of who's working there. They're almost all women. So we've got this balance. We know with an aging population, we don't have enough people to fill these positions. We don't, we just won't. And we're also displacing more women than men. All right, and then generative AI in jobs. 1 in 4 workers are in an occupation with some Gen I exposure. I don't know why it's not more than that. 3.3% of the global employment falls into the highest exposure category, with significant differences between men and women. And the differences increase with countries' income and overall exposure. So where generative AI or robots can come in, we're likely to see that more, that distributive justice principle again, in higher income than lower income countries. All right. Have y'all seen population pyramids? Pretty interesting. And so this one's only 30 years apart, 2020 to 2050. But look at the difference in the projected number of older women compared to men. And these women, men too, are more likely to be in nursing homes. So as we get older, we're all going to need care, right? And so if we're looking at robots to help us out, very definitely going to impact more women than men, because there are just going to be more of us. All right, some ethical issues in dementia. This is from I forget, this might be 2017. It's not that new, but an ethical framework set up by the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. This is in the UK, which I really love. Still older and still very relevant. So ethical decisions, there should be a case-based approach. In other words, it's not a cookie cutter. This gets back to, I really think about narrative ethics. So when we're thinking about using, we'll go into talking about some cases, really is an individual approach to this. And then a belief about the nature of dementia. Oh gosh, it used to be when I was younger. You don't hear about this anymore, but cancer was the big C. People didn't want to talk about it. It's weird, actually. It's just, it's a thing. Now it's almost, dementia has that still a bit yet, right? So people are afraid of dementia, and so common, but we're working to do what we can, but it is a natural thing. And then a belief about the quality of life with dementia, so that people with dementia still deserve, of course, to have the best quality of life possible. And promoting the interests of both the person with dementia and those who care for them, really, really important. So Dr. Khan, some of her research as well, is looking at caregivers and involving them as stakeholders, because both the professional and the family friend caregivers. Acting in accordance with solidarity, that we're all together in this to try and improve people's lives with dementia, and then recognizing personhood, identity, and value. So I really like this framework a lot. All right, so there was a study done, published right before COVID, of professional stakeholders in the use of assistive technology, so robots. It was a qualitative study, which was really cool. So focused interviews with 20 participants, so gerontologists, general practitioner, neurology, nursing, psychiatry, and interestingly, nursing home management. So not just the direct care providers, but decision makers. And concerns that were raised were patient autonomy, informed consent, Yeah, so how do we get informed consent when people don't have the capacity to do that? Data management, data access, and data sharing. Huge, huge, huge. And this is some of the biggest discussion. Another article I looked at, it's old, really old now, 2012, was a pilot study looking at people's reactions to potentially having devices in assisted living nursing homes so that family members could track what was going on with their loved ones. Well, this is just commonplace, right? This happens all the time. I've got two good friends that have parents with dementia, and they have devices with cameras, and they can see what's going on. And when they're not there, communicate with their loved one. Something a good friend of mine just said, they had to separately call the nurse because their loved one was calling out for a nurse and not getting help. So really helpful. And I think most people, if they, in their adulthood years, if they were asked if they would be comfortable, like myself right now, if I were comfortable with my son, he lives in Taiwan, that he'd set something up and he could be watching what I'm doing all the time in the house. I don't think so. 30 years from now, maybe. But then how do we decide this, right? And we're laughing, but this is like, these are these decisions. So who gets access to these data? Yeah. Who owns them? Who gets access to them? Distributive justice we've talked about. So robots can be really helpful. They're still expensive, right? We don't have an inexpensive one that people can have and keep them in their own homes for a longer period of time than moving over to an assisted living, slowing the time from assisted living to a nursing home. The other thing that in this qualitative study, which I really liked as a point, human contact is crucial. We all need human contact, and a robot is not going to substitute for that. We need touch. All right, so case discussion, I'm thinking about this. So this is my dad. He's no longer with us. I'm actually, he died the year before COVID, which was actually good timing. He had dementia, and it would have been really hard to go through COVID where I couldn't have visited him, and he wouldn't have been able to understand why I couldn't visit him. Very intelligent man. He's a forester. I say I love being in the woods because I'm the daughter of a forester. I wish I had been able to have a robot for his care. He was in an assisted living facility. He fell, and we don't know how long he was down. He never went back to assisted living. He only lived actually 8 weeks after that. It was in decline anyway, but it was horrible. I would have loved to have had a robot. Issues around, and not just robotics, but generally with dementia care, are deception and misinformation. It happens all the time. So my grandmother developed dementia. She had already had 2 children die, adult children. And at one stage, the family stopped telling her that because it felt cruel. She'd have to get that pain, just hear that over and over again. Dignity is really interesting. So as an ethicist, my dad was always very proud as his dementia progressed. Quite commonly, people don't tend to care for themselves so much. My mom was quite religious, my dad not so much. He loved going to church. I would take him to church every Sunday. And I still wonder as an ethicist, was this the right thing to do for his dignity? Because he became quite unkempt. He loved to go. It was a small little church in Two Harbors outside of Duluth. They were wonderful to him there. They knew that he had dementia. And I don't know the answer. I know that interaction with humans and robots can't replace this either. Not just the human touch, but interaction with humans is really important. We know that, socialization. So how do we preserve dignity and do what's best for somebody? I don't know. My dad's pre-dementia self, I don't think he would have wanted to be out and be seen like that. but he was so happy. He appeared so happy, right? I don't know. So that these personal cases, I think, are good for you all at your stage to think about that person who's on the other end of what you're doing at some stage, right? And then privacy, so important. With robotics and AI, we have increasing risks for loss of privacy and how we manage that. All right, that was what I wanted to cover. Now I just want to talk about, just have some discussions in a small group. Who should be making these decisions?
What scope are you talking?
So let's talk about technology. Developing new technologies. Is there a point that we shouldn't, even though we could? And what is that point? Who decides that?
Is it okay to do something like euthanasia, so before they decline or reach the state that they don't have the capacity or the competence to decide, they can actually say what they want?
Ah, that's interesting. So didn't talk about that at all. So physician aid in dying or euthanasia. So in Europe, a couple countries have euthanasia. We do not have euthanasia. And that's where the physician themselves actively deliver the agent. We don't have that. So we have 12, I think we're at 12 states right now in the US who have physician aid in dying. We don't in Minnesota currently. It's not ever gotten to a full vote in the state. I suspect we probably will at some stage. With physician aid in dying, and the legislation looks the same in all the states that have passed it across the US, 2 physicians have to say that they think that the patient is within 6 months of dying. And the patient has to have capacity. They have to have capacity, legal competence as well, to make that decision for themselves. Well, dementia will never fit in that. So nobody's going to be within, still have capacity and be within 6 months.
In Europe, definitely for glioblastoma, because it's the grade 4, when they know that at some point they are going to, it's not like dementia, but they are going to become clouded and they don't understand what's happening. As soon as the diagnosis is made, they actually can consent to euthanasia. So it's at the time that they still know what's happening. So it can be 6 months, it can be a year, but it just before the clouding happens.
Yep. So Europe has this, and Canada has medical aid in dying. They have added that people with intractable depression as well. I don't think we would ever have that in US. I'm almost certain we wouldn't. Again, ethics reflecting time and place. I don't think, I can't see that ever passing.
No, I was just thinking, like, if there is a point that you are diagnosed with dementia, you can actually have a questionnaire to say, I want these things, I don't want.
You know, so that's so interesting. And that's why I wanted to go back to this picture of my dad. If you had asked my dad, he wouldn't have wanted to live with dementia. I can guarantee you, if you had asked my dad.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if they don't like to have the camera, then you already have to consent that they don't like.
Interesting. Yeah. Make some of those medical decisions. So that gets it. So
They have to like.
yeah, no, but that's really interesting. So that gets it substituted judgment. Yes. My final conclusion I don't have on here now that you're making me think about it, we all should have, even if you haven't gotten to the stage of having a document that says, this is what I want for end of life. We're not great in our culture about talking about end of life things, but it would be really helpful if we were like, to talk to people who are going to make the decisions for you. When I'm on call as an ethicist and people are, saying, I don't want to, I don't want to pull the plug on dad or whatever. And I really get them to the place of saying, you know what? That's not what you're doing. You're giving words to your father who can't speak for himself. You're telling us what his decision would be for himself. So yes, so substituted judgment, people could, that's a cool thought. People could think about, okay, I've just been diagnosed with dementia, probably still have decision-making capacities for a whole bunch of things, and write those down. They could definitely do that. We don't have a place really for managing that, like at an institutional level, but that would be the time to speak with somebody who would ultimately be making those decisions. So name that healthcare agent and have those discussions about, yep, go ahead and use a robot, because even thinking about loved ones around them, again, going to my dad who fell, and it was pretty bad that he, it didn't look good having been, laid there for 24 hours. He might not want a robot for himself, but he might have wanted it for me, and not having to see that, how he was. That's a great idea. Again, getting back to that substituted judgment, we can only practice substituted judgment if we know what somebody would want to do for themselves. So yeah. And then my last one for all of you, you probably haven't thought about it. How are you engaging stakeholders in what you're doing? Do you do this yet? And how could you? I was part of a panel from National Academy of Sciences looking at vaccinations during the Gulf War. Our soldiers were given a lot of vaccinations very quickly that they'd never had. And we don't have a vaccine schedule for, don't know about long-term health outcomes. And we were trying to gather the evidence. Somebody had done a report. We were reviewing that report and what to do next. Implications would have been probably some payment for soldiers, veterans who had experienced adverse reactions. And when our committee was first gathering and going to review things, who did we want to hear from at our next meeting? And I said, I would like to hear from a veteran that's going to be impacted by this. And somebody else on the committee said, well, why would we want to hear from them? They don't understand these data. I said, because they're the ones impacted by this. Of course we want to hear from them. But for all of us to remember as scientists, who ultimately is impacted, and thinking about how you can engage them earlier in the process. Especially now, say there's such increasing mistrust and distrust in science, the more that we can be out there engaging, the better for all of us. All right, I'm in my hour. I've got lots of references. This is just, I showed you that slide. I mean, you really can't keep up. If you're interested on the ethics side of it, again, the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities is our professional ethics association here in the US. I keep up with the Catholic side of things a lot. I'm not Catholic, but at Essentia Health, we're a merged Catholic, non-Catholic facility, so I have to understand the Catholic side of things as well. The Catholic Health Association does superb webinars, most of them free as another. And then feel free to reach out. I've got the easiest email ever. I know. So people asked how I got it, and I said I just asked. Thank you.